Hello and welcome to my series of conversations with men and women as ideas, vision and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today was born of an American family, grew up in Romania, J. Donald Walters, but became heir to a great ancient tradition embodied in his master, Yogananda Paramhansa. My guest has written over 80 books, 400-odd songs, established communities, nearly 8 communities across the world, addressed and talked to millions of people. I'm delighted to welcome Swami Kriyananda.
I'm delighted to be invited.
Swamiji Kriyananda, and the word Kriya. And your master also spoke extensively about Kriyas. As a method of training the mind, of transformation. What is a Kriya?
Kriya actually is a very simple word. As you must know, it means simply action. Its root is karma, kri. And this is a particular kind of action which helps you to win the battle of Kurukshetra. What I mean by that is, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is telling Arjuna to fight. What it is the battle in the spine. The tendencies in us to rise toward higher aspiration, the tendencies within us to go toward the world, toward materialism, toward attachments and desires. This is the real battle of Kurukshetra, and the war is to overcome your lower tendencies. Kriya helps you to do that. The teaching of Kriya right now in this age is possible because people understand that the nature of matter is energy. Before that, people thought of pranayama as just breathing exercises. Prana really means energy. And if you can learn to raise the energy in your spine, everybody, without knowing it, is more of a yogi than he realizes.
So this is really a juxtaposition in a sense of the working with the inner energies, transforming the internal impetus and ability to act with the external realm of action, which is why
the real karma yoga of the Gita also, the inner action and offering yourself in yajna, which is to say self-offering to God.
Your life in that sense has been an offering to God, and perhaps with your master as an intermediary. Reading some parts of your biography, your life hasn't been easy. There have been many elements of struggle, of overcoming personal imperfections, and in a sense that sort of offers consolation to those of us at the more mundane level, that there is a journey, that overcoming obstacles is
we have
possible.
to do that, but I'd like to offer this as your consolation. Is suffering easier? I'd rather choose that which takes me out of suffering. So it's well worth it. I don't like to talk about the difficulties. I like to think of the rewards. The reward of being peaceful in yourself and finding joy in yourself and finding yourself one with people instead of having enemies wherever you go. I don't think I've had a difficult life at all.
When you say you haven't had a difficult life, that's because it's your experience of life that you haven't sort of responded to as being difficult. When you look at the strivings of the masters, whether it was Ramakrishna or the Buddha, sort of the temptations of Mara, the time that he spent out in the forest, and goes through these processes of engaging in what are sort of he describes in the Four Noble Truths, the dukkha of life, and then using that dukkha, using the suffering as a means of transcendence. And perhaps that where you come from, that you don't experience what we would experience as dukkha at all.
Because there's neither sukha nor dukkha, really. Everything is neutral. It's how we interpret it and how we respond to it that makes it seem either joyful or sad.
Is it a state that's arrived at through your sadhana, through your journey, through your kriyas, or is it something that is spontaneous and natural?
It's partly something that you arrive at, but it's a deliberate attitude that everybody should hold. But so much of our pain is something that we exaggerate. A year after I built our temple at our first community, it burned to the ground. And I was in a shop the same day, and I came into the shop singing, and this lady said to me, "You're singing?" I said, "Well, I've lost a temple. I haven't lost my voice." So
But is this, how is this sort of, this attitude, the state of being, of looking at suffering as a celebration almost, how's that arrived at? What are the techniques and processes?
Well, I'll tell you one very simple thing. Understand that everything is temporary. Nothing lasts. So why live in the moment? Too many people give all importance to this moment.
Did you feel this way when you met your master and you read the autobiography, and if you say, and you went rushing to him? Is this the way that you were feeling when you met him? What was the journey like from the time that you met him and where you are today?
I tell you, it was so fantastic. He was the greatest person I have ever met. It was like living in the presence of God.
Well, where were you at when you met him?
I was 22 and I was young, but I had a certain amount of maturity, I suppose, because he put me in charge of the monks in a year. And I've always had rather a positive attitude on things. I just think, what does it matter? It'll all pass anyway. Mm-hmm. So I was there. I have refined it, but I'm basically the same person.
And what role does a master or a guru or a teacher or whatever words we want to use to describe them play in the life of an aspirant?
Absolutely essential. You see, we are living in an ego, and we have to reach infinite consciousness. Now, how can this little ego, which thinks I'm this body, and separate from your body and other bodies and other things, how can this little ego discover that its reality is infinite? You can't do it by affirmation. You can't do it by this sort of leaping with intellectual bravery. It says in the Bible, a very good statement in the Gospel of St. John, as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God. So it's a matter of receiving the Guru's consciousness in yourself, and in that he gradually transforms you, and you do become a completely different person, and I'm contradicting myself quite consciously in saying that.
So in what way does one become a worthy receptacle for the Guru's consciousness? Is this something that is an accumulation of the karma of previous lifetimes, and we arrive at a state? At what levels?
I asked my Guru one time, have I been your disciple for thousands of years? It was rather a cheeky question to ask him. He said, it's been a long time, that's all I'll say. And the important thing was then my next question, does it always take so long? He said, oh yes, desires for name, fame, this thing and that thing, take them away again and again. It does take time, it takes incarnations. First of all, there was one disciple of his who said, sir, I don't think I have very good karma. He responded very severely. He said, remember, it takes very, very, very good karma even to want to know God. You have to have suffered enough in this world to realize that your home is not here. There's always that thought, well, it didn't work this way, but maybe it'll work this way. No, maybe it'll work that way. When you finally reach that point of understanding that actually what happens is that in the life of somebody who's been on the path for incarnations, even a little bit of suffering reminds him this is the land of dukkha, and I want to know who I am and what it's all about. When you have an intense longing, first of all, God sends you books. Then he sends you teachers. Then, if you're really serious, he sends you a guru. And very few people, even when they come to the guru, really understand that here is where the teaching takes place, not here.
You're watching a conversation with Swami Kriyananda. We'll be right back after a short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to a continuing conversation with Swami Kriyananda. We were talking about the role of the Guru and reincarnation and God. How necessary is it to believe in a God? And isn't sort of believing in a God that each of us define, in practice become a source of so much conflict, because my perception, a vision or understanding of God could be different to yours, and then I stand up to defend my God against it.
I will never blame God. I will blame man. I mean, people can fight over anything. And some people fight over politics, and some people fight over ambition and money, and some people say, well, God is their excuse, but they want to fight, so go ahead and fight. But the truth is that God is a unifying consciousness, and what we call God and how we visualize Him. You see, God is consciousness. That consciousness is of Ananda, absolute bliss. It's also love that takes you there, divine love. But the difficulty with love is it can become personal, and it must be impersonal. And God's love is impersonal because He doesn't want anything from us, but He loves us, so it's personal in us. Now that God is essential to love, something that you can reach up toward. Without that, your energy won't rise. And this is, I was saying, I was starting to say a little bit ago that everybody is a better yogi than he realizes. Everybody knows that if he feels good, he feels uplifted. And if he feels down, he feels downcast. He feels low.
In a sense, the vocabulary of this certainly comes from...
and it's the vocabulary is based on universal experience.
But there are groups and there are communities who experience and articulate this using a different vocabulary. And that has been a source of conflict, whether it's God
that is man.
So in what ways do you, in terms of your vocabulary, your experience, the sociological context in which these traditions evolved, look at other faiths and look at relationships with other faiths and other traditions and people who use a different vocabulary? Is it just really that they're using a different vocabulary and describing the same thing? Or is there...
there is yes else? And no to that answer. Because the same thing is there. It's infinite. However, our view of it, Ramakrishna put it beautifully when he said everybody likes sweetness, but some people like it in the form of sugar, some in the form of sandesh, some in the form of chocolate, etc. And so God, the experience of God, there are all sorts of ways of experiencing Him according to our own samskars, our tendencies. My Guru said that God can come to you, for example, in the form of 1,000 wonderful tastes crushed into one. Whatever we desire, God fulfills that desire. But the closer we come to knowing Him as Himself in the infinite consciousness, the more we see that all is one. And Christian saints, Hindu saints, Muslim, Sufi saints, etc., all of them describe basically the same experience. A feeling that there is one being who produced all of us, who dreamed us all, and His nature is, there's nobody who says, well, my God is a horrible God, he hates people. They all say God is love. They all say God is bliss. So in that sense, there aren't differences. I was not brought up in a Hindu tradition. I was very much attracted to it when I found how universal it was. The two things that attracted me were the universality, the infinite concept of God, which I couldn't see how God could be anything but that. And secondly, that you should practice it and find out for yourself. I believe in this scientific understanding, but this is basic to the true teachings of yoga. Find out for yourself.
Would you then sort of celebrate someone who was a good human being, compassionate, loving, caring, and was agnostic and was an atheist perhaps? Is that possible?
Frankly, I don't think your beliefs matter all that much. People used to believe the world was flat. It didn't make it flat. Our beliefs don't produce truth. So we can believe what we like when we find what truth is. We have experienced it. So yes, I have met people who thought they were atheists, who were certainly not atheists in any way that I would believe. And I've met people who thought they were devotees that I would rather not be around. So it's a matter of who you are.
And what, we were also sort of, talking about the journey, and you said that you are essentially the same person. And we also talked about how through lifetimes, in some senses, a process takes place and we evolve. Have you defined or looked at the manner in which you might have evolved and changed, and in what ways do you see yourself? At one level, fundamentally, or your name may have changed, your title may have changed, but you're surely not the same person you were when you were 4 years old.
Quite right. What I was really trying to say is something deeper. That when God creates a soul, He creates a particular kind of person. He always remains that. That never changes. That person finds God and finds that it's infinite and finds that it's not the ego. But the amazing thing about God is He endowed every soul with individuality. And that particular essence does not change. And I am this kind and you are that kind. And the wonderful thing is that we're all basically manifestations of one truth.
The eternal sort of questioning when we talk about God, that if there is a God, why is there evil? Why is there suffering? Why is there pain?
God, to create this universe, had to create vibration. The chairs in which we're sitting are not solid. Our bodies are not solid. It's all vibration. And that one spirit who is just consciousness vibrated that consciousness. Take a fan. You see the individual blades of the fan. As soon as you turn the fan on, it goes around very fast. It looks like a solid disc. So vibration can be fast enough to our senses to appear solid, but it is not. Now God had to create vibration, which means to use the illustration of waves on the ocean, waves go up, but when the wave rises, it doesn't change the level of the ocean. There has to be a corresponding trough. So for this world to exist at all, there has to be up and down. And that necessitates what we would call good, evil, joy, sorrow, all the varieties of life. And anybody in my guru's autobiography, he mentions the joy of meeting his guru for the first time. And then his guru wanted him to do something he would not do. He was a stubborn young man, and the meeting ended on a certain disharmony the first time. Then my guru came around and accepted. But his interesting comment at the end of that episode, the dual scales of Maya, which balance every sorrow, every joy with a sorrow. And such is life. There is no absolute of anything. It's always opposed by its opposite.
So do you feel, in a sense, privileged that what you experience is predominantly joy? And do you feel compassion or sorrow or regret at the people who don't experience joy and are at the lower ends of the trough of the wave?
Let me say this, the only people who have compassion are those who have joy. People who are in suffering and sort of lost in their suffering are so busy suffering they don't think of anybody else. You'll notice everybody who has compassion and concern for others has also a certain joy. There is also a joy in expanding your consciousness and a suffering in contracting it. So the more your consciousness, which includes feeling, in fact, chitta is feeling above all, that aspect of consciousness, the more it expands, the more it includes other people.
So when you meet these people at the bottom end,
then you want to help them find, you want not to find the upper end. Forgive me for giving a very good example, television. Look at television advertising, how people seeing something perfectly absurd and getting all excited about it. That is the upper end of that little vibration or wave. What you get, if you really have understanding, is try to give them a bliss that never changes. That's in the middle.
So what would happen if sort of everybody ended up in the middle? Would that be going against God's will
it would be
and
God.
purpose?
That is God. God is that calmness in the middle. And the delusion, Maya, is that up and down state.
But if that is the reality, the Maya that God creates for us.
You should not say reality, the appearance, okay?
Well, in a sense, all truth is relative. So there is no absolute truth, or is there?
There is.
There is an absolute truth.
If the ocean is calm, it's absolutely calm. But where there's movement, there's relativity. And where there's relativity, you can say that any truth is relative. There are things that are farther away from that calmness and closer to it. So everything in this world is relative, but beyond this world there is no relativity. God, in fact, is beyond good and evil, but that doesn't mean that he is both good and evil, except in the sense of manifesting them. But the bliss of Satchidananda is beyond that because it's perfect, it's absolute.
So these waves that the God creates as his, her, Maya, if the waves were to cease, would life and consciousness as we know it cease? Because is that God's purpose? The waves or the equilibrium of the waves?
You put it right when you said, as we call it, it is not the reality. The reality we know ceases. But this is not reality, this is Maya. When Maya ceases, there is absolute awareness. And one very important point to remember and to think about too, those people who know God, not one of them has ever said, what a scam, what a disappointment, why he didn't have to do it that way. Every one of them says it was the most wonderful adventure, all those lifetimes spent seeking what I now find, and it was worth it.
You're watching a conversation with Swami Kriyananda, a disciple of Yogananda Paramhansa. We'll be right back after a short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to a continuing conversation with Swami Kriyananda. So when Maya eases and ceases, does life cease? Does it all become consciousness? Is the purpose
as much as
of
life is consciousness, it cannot cease. Restlessness ceases. The desires for this thing and that thing, which most people call living, ceases. You don't need anything because you are. You have. But nothing ceases really. You discover that this is what everything always was. The ocean doesn't cease to exist when the storm ceases. The ocean becomes, you can see it more clearly as an ocean. When you're in a rowboat and the waves, you can only see a few waves around you. But when there's no storm, you can see at a distance.
There's a great emphasis in many of the traditions and in your work of service, of serving others as the practical application of religious, spiritual striving. In what ways have you sought to and reached out to fulfilling that agenda, that process? You've created sort of 8 communities in different parts of the world, Ananda Sanghas.
Well, if you give somebody food, he'll be hungry again in a few hours. If you give him a job, he'll be able to get food and have food all the time. If you give him the understanding and the intelligence and the education to get a job wherever he goes, you're giving him something much better. And by the same token, if you give him that which helps him to realize he doesn't even need food, that's a rare situation, but it exists. There are yogis in the Himalayas who don't eat. They don't need to. But this is so rare that it's hardly worth talking about. What I think I'm trying to do, I know damn well that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to help people to find that joy within themselves, which I think is much more worthwhile than just having job, fancy home, all those things.
Going back to sort of in sort of winding down the program in a sense, is that very often intellectual understanding, teaching, reading the scriptures, offers insights, but it's far more difficult for mundane, everyday sort of aspirants, struggling aspirants such as myself, to translate that into enduring realizations, and even if there are flashes of realization, they quickly disappear when challenged, and we struggle to make them, to actualize them, so that they become an enduring something that is so completely internalized that when threatened or challenged or under a stimulus, whether it is equanimity or love or compassion, that doesn't go away. So there is this process of transformation from intellectual understanding to completely internalizing it and becoming that understanding.
I don't believe much in intellect. Intellect is like living next door to a fine restaurant but not being hungry. Or if you get hungry, instead of wanting good food, you want fish and chips and go to a cheap fast food place. That's not what I'm interested in, inspiration. If I can inspire people to want the truth, that's much more important than giving them all the reasons why they should seek something. So if I can fire you or anyone, and you would not be doing this program if you didn't really feel it yourself, if I can help anyone to want it, that I think is the most important part of teaching.
But I'm going to push you on this. But how do I go beyond wanting it?
Then you need techniques, and this is where yoga is so important. You need to know how to accomplish these things. There are three basic teachings in India: Sankhya, Yoga, Vedanta. Sankhya basically tells you, I need to get out of Maya. Vedanta tells you what you find when you get out of Maya. Yoga tells you how to do it. And I cannot teach you right now
Give me the first lesson, master.
But that is a very important part of it.
So what would be, here we have a television audience, presumably watching this program because they too are interested in wanting this. So what would be, in the vocabulary of American universities, or 101, what would be the first lesson?
The first lesson is to understand how to concentrate. This is the point of concentration in the body, the Vishuddha chakra here between the eyebrows. The Gita talks about that. We need to focus our minds, and this is the easiest place to concentrate on. The Srimad Bhagavatam talks about the heart, and thinking of the heart as a lotus, turning the leaves up so that all your feelings go up to this point. Both are important, and you can't really say which is the more important. They work together, reason and feeling. And with that, the breath, because the breath is restless. So certain exercises that help your breath to become calm. You have to, if you're going to meditate, you can't be going like this. You've got to sit still. And so these are the basic 101 teachings.
And for someone like you, and you're reluctant to describe yourself as a master, as I sought to do when we started our conversation, is there a journey, is there an aspiration, is there a goal in this lifetime, that sort of paths that you still feel you have to traverse?
The goal, it's very funny because you have to go somewhere, but you're really not going anywhere. You're always going to be the center of the universe as far as you're concerned, whether you're here or in America or Russia or anywhere. You have to go to your own center. So the thing is to become, not to go. And if you can realize more and more, and this does come, and I can certainly say that I have gone that way, that the more you understand your own core, the less you think about yourself.
Swamiji, thank you very much. This has been a great blessing and a great honor.